Sarah Martinez stepped onto the shooting range with her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The smell of gunpowder and the sharp crack of rifles filled the air at the exclusive military training facility. She had saved for months to afford just one day at this premium range, known for hosting elite military personnel and competitive shooters. The other shooters barely glanced at her as she signed in. Sarah looked nothing like the typical clientele. No expensive gear, no military patches, just a quiet woman in simple clothes with calloused hands that told stories of hard work. The registration clerk looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism when she requested access to the long-range precision course. "Ma'am, that's our advanced section. Most folks start with the basic pistol range," he said, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "I'd like the long-range course, please," Sarah repeated calmly, placing her payment on the counter. As she made her way to lane 15, whispers followed her. A group of weekend warriors in tactical gear exchanged amused glances. One of them, a stocky man with an expensive rifle, nudged his buddy and pointed in her direction. "Look at that setup," he chuckled, watching Sarah unpack her modest bolt-action rifle. It was clearly used with worn bluing and a scope that had seen better days. "Probably picked that up at a pawn shop." Sarah methodically assembled her equipment, checking each piece with practiced precision. She adjusted the scope with small, confident movements, her fingers working the turrets like a musician tuning an instrument. The other shooters continued their commentary, assuming she couldn't hear them over the noise. "$20 says she can't hit the broadside of a barn," another voice added. Sarah loaded her first round and took her position. The range master called for the line to go hot, and suddenly the casual atmosphere shifted. This was serious business now. Targets appeared at 300 yards. Standard military silhouettes that would challenge even experienced shooters. She settled into her stance, her body finding a natural rhythm with the rifle. Years of muscle memory took over as she controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. The world around her faded to nothing but the target, the crosshairs, and the gentle pressure of the trigger. The first shot rang out clean and true. Through her scope, Sarah watched the bullet punch through the 10-ring dead center. She worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent casing and chambering the next round. The second shot followed the first, then the third, each one finding its mark with mechanical precision. Behind her, the chatter had stopped. The weekend warriors were now watching in silence as this quiet woman put round after round exactly where she intended. Her shooting position was textbook perfect, her breathing controlled, her follow-through flawless. "Must be getting lucky," one of them muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah finished her string of 10 shots and set her rifle down. She walked to the spotting scope to check her target, aware that every eye on the range was now following her movements. The target told its own story. 10 holes clustered in the center ring so tightly they could be covered by a quarter. When she returned to her shooting position, the range master was standing there with a measuring device and a look of professional interest. He had been watching from the tower and decided to take a closer look at this unexpected performance. "Nice shooting," he said simply. "Mind if I ask where you trained?" Sarah began packing her rifle with the same methodical care she had shown in unpacking it. "Here and there," she replied quietly. "Just picked it up along the way." The group of tactical enthusiasts had moved closer, their earlier amusement replaced by grudging respect and curiosity. The stocky man who had made the earlier comment about her equipment was now studying her worn rifle with new appreciation. "That's some serious precision shooting," he admitted. "What's your background? Competition? Military?" Sarah just smiled and continued packing. She wasn't here to prove anything to these men or to share war stories. She had come to shoot, to feel the familiar comfort of marksmanship, and to remember what it felt like to be truly good at something that mattered. As she shouldered her duffel bag and prepared to leave, she could feel their eyes still following her. The whispers had started again, but now they carried a different tone. Speculation rather than mockery, respect rather than dismissal. She walked toward the exit, her head held high but not arrogant. Sarah had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, and her rifle had done all the talking necessary. Behind her, the weekend warriors were still clustered around lane 15, examining the target she had left behind and trying to understand how someone they had so quickly dismissed had just schooled them in precision shooting. The range master watched her go from his elevated position, making a mental note of her name from the registration log. In 30 years of running military and civilian ranges, he had seen thousands of shooters come and go. Very few possessed the natural talent and obvious training that this quiet woman had just displayed. He found himself wondering what her story really was, and why someone with such evident skills was shooting alone on a public range, rather than competing professionally or serving in some official capacity. Sarah stepped into the afternoon sunlight, already planning her next visit to the range. She had found a place where she could practice, where she could maintain the skills that had once defined her life. What she didn't know was that her demonstration of marksmanship had been witnessed by more than just curious weekend shooters, and that her quiet day at the range was about to change everything. 3 weeks later, Sarah returned to the range with the same quiet determination. Word of her shooting had apparently spread because this time she noticed more people watching her from the moment she walked in. The registration clerk greeted her by name and immediately assigned her to lane 15 without being asked. "The usual setup, Ms. Martinez?" he asked with newfound respect. Sarah nodded and made her way to the familiar lane. The weekend warriors were there again, but their attitude had completely changed. Instead of dismissive glances, she received polite nods and curious stares. The stocky man from her previous visit even offered a tentative greeting. As she unpacked her equipment, Sarah noticed a small crowd gathering at the observation deck. Word had spread through the local shooting community about the mysterious woman who could put every shot exactly where she wanted it. Some had come specifically to watch her shoot, turning her practice session into an impromptu demonstration. She tried to ignore the attention and focus on her routine. The rifle felt familiar in her hands as she made her adjustments and prepared for her first string of fire. But today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, an expectation that made her skin prickle with awareness. Sarah was lining up her first shot when she noticed him. A man in civilian clothes stood apart from the other observers, watching her with the intensity of a professional rather than the curiosity of an amateur. His posture was military, his gaze calculating. Even in jeans and a polo shirt, he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command. She forced herself to focus on the target and began her shooting sequence. Each shot rang out with mechanical precision, punching holes in the 10 ring with boring consistency. After her first 10 shots, she noticed the military man had moved closer. He was now standing behind the firing line, studying her technique with obvious professional interest. "Impressive grouping," he said when she paused to reload. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone used to being listened to. "Military training?" Sarah glanced at him briefly before returning to her rifle. "Something like that," she replied, her tone polite but not encouraging further conversation. The stance, the breathing control, the follow-through, all textbook. "But there's something more than basic training there. Advanced marksmanship school? Special operations?" Sarah continued loading her magazine, her movement steady despite the pointed questions. She had learned to deflect inquiries about her background, to give just enough information to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything important. "I shoot recreationally now," she said simply, just trying to stay sharp. The man extended his hand. "Commander David Chen, Navy Special Warfare. Sorry to interrupt your practice, but I had to see for myself. The range master told me about your shooting last week." Sarah shook his hand briefly, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of serious training. "Sarah Martinez. And you're not interrupting. Mind if I observe? I'm always interested in watching skilled marksmen work." She shrugged and returned to her shooting position. If he wanted to watch, that was his business. She had nothing to hide about her shooting technique, even if she preferred to keep the rest of her background private. As Sarah continued her practice, Commander Chen watched with the trained eye of someone who had seen the best shooters in the world. Her form was flawless, her consistency machine-like. Each shot placement was deliberate and precise, showing not just natural talent but years of serious training and practice. Between shooting strings, he asked casual questions about her equipment, her training schedule, and her shooting goals. Sarah answered politely but minimally, offering no more information than necessary. She had learned to be careful about revealing too much to military personnel, especially those with the bearing and rank of someone like Commander Chen. "Ever consider competitive shooting?" he asked after watching her put another 10 rounds into a group the size of a silver dollar at 400 yards. With skills like yours, you could go far in precision rifle competitions. I prefer shooting for myself, Sarah replied, beginning to pack her equipment. The attention was making her uncomfortable, and she had accomplished what she came for. Fair enough, Chen said. But if you ever change your mind, here's my card. The Navy has programs for exceptional marksmen, both active duty and civilian contractors. Sarah took the card but didn't look at it immediately. Thank you, but I'm not looking for employment. Of course. Just keep it in case you ever want to talk shop with other serious shooters. There aren't many people who can shoot like you do. As Sarah finished packing, she could feel Commander Chen still watching her. There was something in his gaze that made her think he suspected there was more to her story than recreational shooting. Military officers like him didn't just happen upon civilian ranges and hand out business cards to random shooters, no matter how skilled they might be. She shouldered her bag and headed for the exit, nodding politely to the commander as she left. Behind her, she could hear him talking to the range master in low tones, probably asking more questions about her previous visits and her background. In the parking lot, Sarah finally looked at the business card he had given her. Commander David Chen, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The address was in Virginia Beach, not far from the headquarters of the Navy's most elite units. The fact that someone of his position had sought her out at a civilian range was both flattering and concerning. She tucked the card into her wallet and drove home, her mind turning over the encounter. Sarah had worked hard to build a quiet, anonymous life away from the attention of military recruiters and government agencies. But apparently her skills were distinctive enough to attract notice even when she was trying to fly under the radar. What worried her most was that Commander Chen had the look of a man who didn't give up easily. His questions had been casual, but his interest was clearly professional. Sarah suspected this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed, and that thought made her more uncomfortable than she cared to admit. Sarah didn't return to the range for 2 weeks, hoping that Commander Chen would lose interest and move on to other matters. But when she finally did come back, she found him waiting for her in the parking lot, leaning against a black SUV with government plates. "Ms. Martinez," he greeted her as she stepped out of her car. "Mind if we talk before you shoot today?" Sarah slung her bag over her shoulder and studied his face. There was something different about his demeanor today. More serious, more official. "What about, Commander? About why someone with your level of training is working as a night shift security guard, instead of putting those skills to better use?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. He had been investigating her, digging into her background and current employment. Her carefully constructed private life was no longer private. "I don't know what you mean." Sarah Elena Martinez, former Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. 2 tours in Afghanistan as a designated marksman with Marine Force Reconnaissance. Bronze Star with V device for Valor, Purple Heart, and a list of confirmed kills that would make most snipers jealous. Sarah's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. 3 years ago. You left the Marines after your unit was hit by an IED. Lost your spotter and 2 other team members. You've been working security jobs and living alone ever since, shooting at civilian ranges to maintain skills you're not using. "My military service is my business, Commander, as is my current employment." Chen's expression softened slightly. "You're right, and I apologize for the intrusion. But I have a problem that requires someone with very specific skills, and there aren't many people who can do what you can do. I'm not interested in contract work." "This isn't about a contract. There's a situation developing that requires someone who can make impossible shots under extreme pressure. Someone who understands tactical operations but isn't currently active military. Someone who can blend in and operate independently." Sarah started walking toward the range entrance, hoping to end the conversation. "Find someone else. There is no one else. At least not with your combination of skills and current status." Chen fell into step beside her. "A terrorist cell has taken hostages in an embassy compound overseas. The situation is delicate, too sensitive for official military intervention, but too dangerous for conventional law enforcement. Sounds like a job for special operations." "It would be, except the terrorists specifically demanded that no active military personnel be involved in any rescue attempt. They have intelligence sources that would expose official involvement immediately. But a former Marine working private security? Someone who appears to be just a civilian contractor? That might work." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. "You want me to pretend to be a contractor while actually working for the government? I want you to help save 12 innocent lives, including 3 children." The hostage takers have already killed one person to prove they're serious. Time is running out and conventional approaches aren't working. Why me specifically? There have to be other former military snipers who could do this. Chen pulled out his phone and showed her a satellite image of a compound surrounded by walls and guard towers. The shot that needs to be made is 800 meters through a window that's only visible for 3 seconds when a door opens. In high wind with civilian hostages in the potential line of fire, most snipers might be able to make that shot on a range with perfect conditions. You could make it under battlefield stress with lives hanging in the balance. Sarah studied the image, her tactical mind automatically calculating wind drift, bullet drop, and timing requirements. It was indeed an extremely difficult shot, the kind that required not just technical skill, but the mental toughness to perform under ultimate pressure. Even if I could make the shot, I haven't operated in a combat environment for 3 years. I'm out of practice with team coordination and mission planning. The team is already in place. They're waiting for one component, a sniper who can make an impossible shot and help bring those hostages home alive. Sarah looked away from the phone, her mind churning. She had left military service specifically to avoid situations like this, to escape the weight of life and death decisions and the responsibility for other people's survival. I can't or won't. Both. I'm done with that life, Commander. I shoot targets at ranges now, not people in combat zones. Chen put his phone away and studied her face. The children being held hostage are between 6 and 10 years old. Their parents were embassy staff who thought they were safe in a friendly country. The terrorists are demanding the release of prisoners that no government can legally free. In 48 hours, they're going to start executing hostages to force compliance. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting against the emotions that Chen's words stirred up. She had joined the military to protect people like those hostages, to stand between innocent civilians and those who would hurt them, but she had also seen what that responsibility could cost, had paid the price in friends lost and trauma that still haunted her quiet moments. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, but I need an answer tonight. The team deploys tomorrow morning with or without you. Here's a complete briefing packet. He handed her a thick envelope. Everything you need to know about the situation and the proposed mission. Sarah took the envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. If I say yes, what exactly are you asking me to do? Pose as a private security contractor hired by the hostages' families. Insert with a small team of former military personnel, who are officially just concerned citizens. Make one perfect shot to eliminate the terrorist leader at the moment the assault team breaches the compound. Help bring those hostages home alive. And if I say no? Chen's expression grew grim. Then we try a conventional assault with active duty forces and hope the terrorists don't carry out their threat to kill hostages if they detect military involvement. The odds of success drop dramatically, and innocent people die. Sarah tucked the envelope into her bag, her mind already turning over the tactical challenges described in their brief conversation. Despite her reluctance to return to combat operations, her professional instincts were engaged. The Marine in her was calculating angles and distances, considering equipment requirements and contingency plans. I'll read the briefing and call you tonight, she said. That's all I can ask. Thank you for considering it, Sarah. Sometimes the right person for an impossible job is someone who never wanted to do impossible jobs in the first place. Commander Chen walked back to his SUV, leaving Sarah standing alone outside the shooting range. She had come here for a peaceful afternoon of practice shooting, and instead found herself holding a mission briefing that could pull her back into a world she thought she had left behind forever. Sarah spent the entire evening reading through the mission briefing in her small apartment. The intelligence reports painted a grim picture. A well-organized terrorist cell had taken over a remote embassy compound, holding 12 hostages, including the ambassador's family. The terrorists were demanding the release of their leader from a maximum security prison, something no government could agree to without encouraging more attacks. The tactical plan was elegant in its simplicity. A small team would approach the compound posing as private contractors hired by the hostages' families to negotiate. Sarah would position herself on a ridge 800 meters away, providing overwatch and taking out the terrorist leader at the precise moment the assault team moved to rescue the hostages. The shot itself was brutally difficult. The target would only be visible through a second-floor window when he opened a door to check the hallway. Intelligence suggested this happened every 30 minutes during his security rounds. The window of opportunity would last exactly 3 seconds, during which Sarah would need to account for wind, elevation, and the movement of the target. At midnight, Sarah called the number Commander Chen had given her. "I'll do it," she said simply when he answered. "Thank you. Transport leaves from Norfolk Naval Base at 600. Bring minimal personal gear. Everything tactical will be provided on site." "Commander, what happens to me after this mission is complete?" There was a pause. "You go back to your life. No one will ever know you were involved. Your service record remains sealed and officially you were never there. And if something goes wrong, then you were a private contractor who volunteered to help rescue hostages. The government will deny any knowledge of your involvement, but your family will be taken care of." Sarah hung up and began packing. She chose practical clothes, sturdy boots, and a few personal items that had carried her through difficult times before. As she folded her clothes, she noticed the small mirror on her dresser and instinctively glanced at her left shoulder blade, where a tattoo lay hidden beneath her shirt. Most people never saw the intricate design that covered her upper back. A Marine Corps eagle, globe and anchor surrounded by the names of her fallen teammates. It was a painful reminder of loss, but also a source of strength when she needed to remember why she had chosen to serve. The flight to the staging area took 18 hours with multiple stops and aircraft changes. Sarah found herself on military transports filled with equipment and personnel who spoke in code and avoided eye contact. By the time she reached the forward operating base, she felt like she was stepping back in time to her active duty days. Commander Chen met her at the landing strip, now dressed in tactical gear and carrying himself with the focused intensity of a mission commander. "Welcome to the team, Sarah. Let me introduce you to your temporary squad mates." The team was exactly what she had expected. 4 former Special Operations personnel now working as private contractors, each bringing specific skills to the mission. They greeted her with the professional courtesy reserved for proven operators, having clearly been briefed on her background and capabilities. "Martinez will be our overwatch," Chen explained to the group. "She'll provide cover during the approach and take the primary target when we initiate the rescue." The team leader, a former Delta Force operator named Jake Stevens, showed Sarah the equipment that had been assembled for her use. The rifle was a custom-built precision weapon with advanced optics and ballistic computers. Everything about it screamed military spec and unlimited budget. "Beautiful piece of equipment," Sarah said, running her hands over the familiar lines of the rifle. "Who put this together?" "Navy Special Warfare Technical Division. It's zeroed for the ammunition you'll be using and the range you'll be shooting. We've got a practice range set up that replicates the actual shot conditions." Sarah spent the next 6 hours on the practice range, familiarizing herself with the equipment and practicing the specific shot she would need to make. The mock-up was frighteningly accurate, complete with wind generators and moving targets that appeared in the window for exactly 3 seconds. After her 20th successful practice shot, Stevens nodded his approval. "You haven't lost a step. That's some impressive shooting under simulated stress." "Simulated stress is different from the real thing," Sarah replied, cleaning the rifle with practiced efficiency. "When there are real hostages depending on that shot, everything changes. That's why Chen specifically requested you. He said you're someone who shoots better when lives are on the line, not worse." That evening, the team received final intelligence updates and went through last-minute equipment checks. The mission would begin before dawn, with the team approaching the compound as the sun came up. Sarah would be in position on the ridge by the time negotiations began, ready to take her shot when the assault team gave the signal. As she lay in her bunk that night, Sarah found herself thinking about the hostages rather than the tactical challenges ahead. Somewhere in that compound, 12 people were depending on her ability to make one perfect shot at exactly the right moment. 3 of them were children who probably didn't understand why armed men were holding them prisoner. She had joined the Marines to protect people like those hostages, to stand between innocent civilians and those who would harm them. Her military service had ended badly, with friends lost and trauma that still affected her daily life. But tomorrow, she would have a chance to remember why she had chosen to serve in the first place. Sarah checked her equipment one final time before trying to sleep. The rifle lay broken down in its case, each component precisely placed and secured. Her personal gear was minimal, just the essentials needed for the mission. But hidden in her pocket was a small photo of her former spotter and teammate. A reminder of the cost of failure and the importance of bringing everyone home alive. Tomorrow would test not just her marksmanship skills, but her ability to function under the ultimate pressure. 12 lives would depend on her ability to make one impossible shot at exactly the right moment. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to rest, knowing that in a few hours she would either help save innocent lives or live with the consequences of failure for the rest of her life. The mission began before sunrise, with Sarah hiking alone to her shooting position on the ridge overlooking the embassy compound. She carried her rifle in a civilian backpack, dressed as a tourist who might be photographing the sunrise. If anyone spotted her, she was just another traveler exploring the countryside. The ridge provided perfect concealment while offering a clear line of sight to the target building. Sarah settled into position behind a cluster of rocks, using her spotting scope to study the compound layout and confirm the intelligence reports. Everything matched the briefing photos: the guard towers, the main building, and the second-floor window where the terrorist leader would appear. Through her radio earpiece, she could hear the team's progress as they approached the compound's main gate. Stevens was negotiating with the guards, presenting himself as a representative of the hostages' families who had come to discuss terms for their release. "Overwatch in position," Sarah reported quietly into her throat microphone. "Clear line of sight to target window. Standing by. Copy, Overwatch. Negotiations beginning now." Sarah watched through her scope as Stevens and his partner were escorted into the compound. The plan called for them to demand proof that the hostages were alive, which would require the terrorist leader to check on them personally. Intelligence suggested he made these rounds every 30 minutes, and the negotiation timing was designed to coincide with his next scheduled check. Minutes passed with routine radio chatter as the team established their positions around the compound. Sarah controlled her breathing and checked her equipment one final time. Wind was minimal, temperature was dropping slightly as the sun rose, and her rifle was performing exactly as expected during her range time. "Movement in target window," she reported. A figure had appeared briefly, but it wasn't the right person, not the primary target. Continuing to observe. The waiting was always the hardest part. Sarah had learned during her Marine service that the time between mission start and action was when doubts and fears tried to creep in. She forced herself to focus on the technical aspects of the shot: range, wind, target movement patterns, and timing. "Overwatch, we've made contact with the hostages," Stevens reported. "All 12 are alive, but 3 are injured. One of the children needs medical attention. We need to move this along." Sarah's jaw tightened. An injured child changed the dynamics completely. Every minute of delay could mean the difference between life and death for that young hostage. She found herself willing the terrorist leader to make his appearance so she could take the shot and end this standoff. "I see movement near the target room," she reported. "Multiple figures in the hallway. Stand by." Through her scope, Sarah could see armed figures moving through the second-floor corridor. The terrorist leader was distinctive, taller than his men, wearing a red headband that made him easy to identify. Intelligence photos had burned his face into her memory during the mission briefing. Target approaching the window. Preparing for shot. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar calm that came with total focus. Her breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm, her heartbeat steadied, and the world narrowed to nothing but the crosshairs and the distant window. This was the moment when all her training and experience came together. The door opened and the terrorist leader stepped into view. He was checking something on a tablet, unaware that he was being watched by a sniper 800 meters away. Sarah had practiced this exact shot dozens of times, but now there was no room for error. She placed the crosshair center mass on his chest and began her trigger squeeze. The rifle fired with a clean break, and through the scope she watched the bullet's impact. The terrorist leader dropped immediately, the tablet spinning from his hands as he fell. "Target down," she reported calmly. "Primary threat eliminated." The compound erupted into chaos as the assault team moved in from multiple directions. Sarah maintained her overwatch position, scanning for other threats and providing updates on what she could see from her elevated position. Multiple hostiles moving to the first floor, at least 6 armed individuals retreating toward the rear of the building. "Copy, can you see the hostage room?" Sarah adjusted her scope and found the ground floor room where the hostages were being held. Through the window she could see figures huddled together, adults protecting children, everyone pressed against the far wall away from the door. Hostages are taking cover in the southeast corner of the room. 3 armed guards remaining in the hallway outside. The radio traffic intensified as the assault team cleared the building room by room. Sarah watched through her scope as smoke grenades filled the corridors and the team moved with practiced precision toward the hostage room. "Hostage room secure," Stevens announced. "All 12 civilians are alive and accounted for. The injured child is stable and receiving first aid." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The mission was a success. The hostages were safe, the primary threat had been eliminated, and no one on the assault team had been injured. Her single shot had made the difference between a successful rescue and a potential tragedy. "Overwatch beginning withdrawal," she reported, already breaking down her rifle and preparing to leave the ridge. "Negative Overwatch. Maintain position until we've evacuated the hostages. Local authorities are responding and we need eyes on the approaches." Sarah reassembled her rifle and resumed her watch. In the distance, she could see vehicles approaching the compound. Local police and medical personnel responding to reports of gunfire. The hostages were being escorted to safety, including the injured child who was walking with help from one of Stevens's team members. 20 minutes later, the last of the hostages had been evacuated, and the assault team was withdrawing. Sarah packed her equipment and began the hike back to her extraction point, where a civilian vehicle waited to take her back to the airfield. As she walked away from the ridge, Sarah reflected on what had just happened. For the first time in 3 years, she had used her skills to save lives rather than simply maintaining proficiency on a shooting range. The weight of responsibility had been enormous, but so had the satisfaction of knowing that 12 people would go home to their families because she had made one perfect shot when it mattered most. The mission was over, but Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed inside her. She was no longer just a former Marine working security jobs and shooting at paper targets. She was someone who could still make a difference when innocent lives hung in the balance. 3 months after the hostage rescue, Sarah found herself back at the same shooting range where this journey had begun. But now everything was different. The weekend warriors still gathered in their tactical gear, but they greeted her with genuine respect rather than amusement. Word of her involvement in some kind of overseas security operation had somehow leaked into the shooting community, though the details remained vague and unconfirmed. Commander Chen had kept his promise. Officially, Sarah Martinez had never been involved in any government operation. Her military records remained sealed, and no mention of the hostage rescue appeared in any public documents. But within certain circles, her reputation had grown considerably. The shooting range had become a different place for Sarah. Instead of a refuge from her past, it was now a bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming. She still worked her security job, but now she also received occasional calls from Commander Chen about situations that required someone with very specific skills. Most of these calls she declined. Sarah had learned to be selective about the mission she accepted, choosing only those where innocent lives were at stake, and conventional approaches wouldn't work. She had become what the military called a singleton operator, someone who worked alone on problems that couldn't be solved through normal channels. On this particular afternoon, Sarah was working on precision shots at extended range when she noticed a young woman watching her from the observation deck. The woman was clearly military. Her posture, haircut, and the way she studied Sarah's technique all screamed active duty. After Sarah finished her shooting string, the woman approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Corporal Jennifer Walsh, Marine Corps. I heard you were Force Recon back in Afghanistan." Sarah studied the young Marine's face. She looked barely old enough to enlist, with the eager intensity of someone still new to military service. "What can I do for you, Corporal? I'm trying to qualify for Scout Sniper School, but I'm having trouble with some of the precision shooting requirements. My instructor said I might benefit from working with someone who's been in combat. They mentioned your name." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Her name wasn't supposed to be mentioned by anyone, especially not Marine Corps instructors. "Who exactly suggested you talk to me?" "Master Sergeant Rodriguez at Quantico. He said you were one of the best designated marksmen he'd ever worked with, and that you might be willing to share some techniques with Marines who were serious about their training." Rodriguez had been Sarah's first shooting instructor when she enlisted. The fact that he was still training new snipers and had recommended her meant more than any official recognition could have. It also meant that despite the official secrecy surrounding her recent activities, the Marine Corps community was well aware of what she had been doing. "Show me what you're working on," Sarah said, gesturing toward the rifle Corporal Walsh was carrying. For the next 2 hours, Sarah worked with the young Marine on breathing techniques, trigger control, and the mental aspects of precision shooting. Walsh was a good student, attentive, dedicated, and willing to accept criticism without defensiveness. The technical skills are only half the battle, Sarah explained as they finished up. The real challenge is learning to perform under pressure when lives depend on your shot. That's something you can't fully prepare for in training. How do you handle it? The pressure, I mean. Sarah thought about the terrorist leader falling through her scope, about 12 hostages walking out alive because she had made one perfect shot. You remember why you're there? It's not about proving how good you are or showing off your skills. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. As Corporal Walsh packed her equipment, she hesitated before asking her final question. Ma'am, do you ever regret leaving the Marines? Sarah considered the question carefully. 3 months ago, she would have said no without hesitation. But now, after rediscovering that her skills could still make a difference, the answer was more complicated. I regret the circumstances that led to my discharge, she said finally, but I don't regret the path that brought me here. Sometimes you have to leave one form of service to find another. After the young Marine left, Sarah stayed on the range for another hour, thinking about the conversation and what it revealed about her current situation. She was no longer just a former Marine trying to forget her past. She had become something new, a bridge between the military world and the civilian world, someone who could operate in both but belonged fully to neither. Her phone rang as she was packing her equipment. Commander Chen's number appeared on the screen. Sarah, I have a situation developing in Southeast Asia. Americans being held by a criminal organization, local authorities compromised, and time running short. Are you interested? Sarah looked out at the shooting range where she had first encountered those dismissive weekend warriors, who had laughed at her equipment and questioned her abilities. Now this place represented something different, not an escape from her abilities, but a reminder of what she could do when she chose to act. Send me the briefing, she said. I'll review it and get back to you tonight. Thank you. And Sarah? The family of the ambassador's daughter from the last operation wanted me to pass along their gratitude. They know someone risked everything to bring their child home, even if they can't know who. After hanging up, Sarah stood quietly on the empty shooting range as the sun set behind the target berms. She thought about the choices that had brought her to this moment: joining the Marines, serving in combat, leaving the military after tragedy, and now finding a new way to serve that honored both her skills and her values. The weekend warriors had laughed at her when they first saw her modest equipment and unassuming appearance. They had judged her by her gear rather than her abilities, by her clothes rather than her character. But Commander Chen had seen past the surface to recognize someone who could accomplish the impossible when innocent lives hung in the balance. Sarah shouldered her rifle bag and walked toward the parking lot, already thinking about the new mission briefing she would read tonight. She had found her place in the world, not as a former Marine haunted by the past, but as someone who could still make a difference in the present. The tattoo hidden beneath her shirt would always remind her of teammates lost, but now it also reminded her of a promise kept and innocent lives saved. Behind her, the shooting range stood empty in the gathering darkness, ready for tomorrow's shooters who would come to practice their skills on paper targets. But Sarah Martinez now knew that the most important targets weren't made of paper, and the shots that really mattered were the ones that brought people home alive.